It's already that time again? Didn't Bloomberg just come out? Oh well, the draft format sucks, so I guess that's fine. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Just Dudes in Hallways Gaming Peasant Cube update. And I think we managed to get through this with only one actual dude in the hallway, but man did this have a lot of them. Because Tim and I care about you, the listener, the Baker's Bane duo is trying to do a peasant review of each set, and that means I'm going to try to keep these card discussions in this very quick and make it just more of a changelog update. Check out our bonus episode, The Jank Tank, to hear our full thoughts of these cards and others that we ended up deciding to pass on. Since Tim isn't here, does that make me the keen-eyed curator today? As usual, we'll start off in white. 6-mana Flame Tongue Kavus are so hot right now. This particular one kind of blends a 6-mana FTK, a Lagrella, and a premium reanimation target into one. We're worried we have too many of these cards, but they play well and are generally liked. The solo plays a role of a blink or reanimation cheat target for the most part, and it's been a decent role player, but feels more niche as an expensive card compared to this sort of FTK effect. So this is the epitome of a test card. Sheltered by Ghost is a high-risk, high-reward tempo play, and we think it's a really cool design. The proliferation of these expensive 6-mana FTKs in our cube mean that this more expensive removal option could get punished by the Ward 2 compared to traditional removal. Even the more traditional removal is still probably going to take your turn. Radiant Smite did what we wanted, providing a passable removal spell that was decent when going second, but it's not really necessary at the moment. Split Skin Doll is a rock solid card, and we know it's going to play well. The question is going to remain of how high you should pick it. And I have to say, it breaks my heart to do this, but Rescuer Chinga is coming out because apparently we can't have an entire section of Core Skyfishers. Teld. Surgical Suite looks like a rock-solid reanimation effect, and we debated for a while between Cure and Helping Hand for the swap, and we decided to keep the more efficient card, despite Dewdrop Cure's higher ceiling. We don't expect the Hospital Room to come up a ton, but given Surgical Suite is a really solid card in its own right, it's pure upside. Patched Plaything was a card that caught my eye as support for our black-white small ball reanimation deck. There's a number of other ways to get this to come in as a 4/3 double strike, and I think it could be an interesting synergy card. Proud Pack Rhino has a Modern Horizon symbol, so it's probably just great, but it hasn't really been showing up in deck, so we're going to go ahead and cut it. And that's going to take us into our blue section. Long River's Pool hasn't really done anything, so we're going to be trying the next Blue Essence Scatter Plus. This one does feel like meaningful upside, allowing us to provide protection for our creatures or potentially reuse our enchantments like rooms. Fading Hope is a good bit worse here than it is in the main cube, as the tempo blowouts aren't quite as strong. We really didn't want to substantially increase the amount of bounce, since this is an effect we already have quite a bit of. Locker Room is a pretty decent upside to staple on to the Bottomless Pool's bounce effect, and while it's not an instant, it should still perform rather well. Fear of Isolation is sweet. Tim and I both like that this card is a bit more deliberate and committal than Sentinel. It hasn't come up a crazy amount, but the combination of this plus Plume-Creed Escort just makes it very, very difficult sometimes to actually kill creatures, and combined with the removal of Chinga should make people have to actually value these sort of protection effects a little more highly, since there's not going to be infinite of them. Man of War is at its best in the blue-red deck as a dorky tempo creature, and that deck wants to keep a spell density. So we think this is generally an upgrade on the slot, unless you're doing things like small ball reanimation on Man of War or Core Skyfisher effects. But the deck that wants this most is going to prefer the Grasp, we think. All right, and that takes us into black. We're starting off here with Dire Sight, swapping for Defiled Crypt. Dire Sight's just not a good effect in Contemporary Magic. Paying life while also not adding to the board puts you super far behind in most cases. And while we're generally getting concerned with how many Raise Deads we're running, it's hard to turn down one that's got all of this upside on it. The gamed object effects just play super well in our environment, and this even has incidental support for Roots. Leering Onlooker was a card that just reads better than it plays. It's a passable 2-drop, but the amount of mana you have to spend combined with the bats entering tapped just always feels underwhelming. Stick Twister and these Zoya type effects are really cool, though they do also tend to read a little bit better than they play. We're just a fan of the card. We're bringing back Lampad partly to help the handful of Delirium cards we added, and partly because Vermin Gorger was exceptionally powerful at just completely invalidating games. The Drain 2 in a sort of fair manner just made it very, very difficult to win, whereas Lampad's a little more committal. Finally, we have Wither and Bloom swapping out for Nowhere to Run. This is a very similar swap, and we've mentioned before that these sort of gameplay, game object effects are really great. We had a similar effect for a while with Soul Innervation at 4 mana, and this is much more efficiently costed, being the amount of mana we would expect to play for this sort of effect. All right, and that takes us into red. We really like when cards have some push and pull to them. Fear of Burning Alive should have a higher ceiling than Skoa, and hopefully if you're trying to do Delirium, you'll have it by turn 6 if you're building your deck correctly. Some of these modern prints are wild. Gremlin in an appropriate deck should be an evasive aggressive creature that's also rummaging every turn. Detective is really powerful in environments where we get to sack an artifact as the main mode and draw a bunch of cards, but we think Gremlin is much better on average in the context of this cube. I'm still not sold on Savannah Lions anymore at all, but Norn does have the kind of upside we're looking for if we want to try them. Being able to attack more aggressively and rebuy ETBs should be worth the 1 mana cost of entry for some deck. We really like Epicure, but we're at the point where a lot of section cuts are hard, so something had to go. Rapid Gnaw was fine for aggressive creature decks, but we wanted to try a few of the rooms, and this seems like one of the better ones. You can cast this early as an Anthem, and you'll have some card draw sitting around for later, and that should play well in the same sort of creature decks that might be interested in Rapid Gnaw. That's going to take us into green. Green's been performing super well, and we don't really feel like it needs 2 of these FTK creatures up on the curve. We like that Agatha's Champion has generally been better and also has a deck building cost, that push and pull that we mentioned. Altonac is really, really big, and this is more of a, it's cool, let's see what they cook up kind of card. We have a good bit of reanimation in this cube, so have fun, guys. Scrapgorger has revealed itself to be a bit of a problematic card across multiple environments at this point. Even at base, it's a good mana dork, and it eventually becomes a reasonably sized creature. Being a consistent instant speed graveyard hate card that also enables roots is just a bit much for one card to do. It's a really sweet card, but we're going to go ahead and cut it after a lot of complaining that people's decks either get rolled by this card or it's enabling something really powerful. It's just doing a little bit too much at the moment. Under the Skin is a really exciting variant of this sort of Ewit effect, as it can dump the target for you on curve. And usually we think this will be able to find you a land if you really need it. Farmer's a fine enabler, but it's a rather anemic card and limited to 1 deck, whereas Under the Skin should be a high priority card for a number of decks. This is a fairly minor swap, but we liked that the Beastie had a clean design, and it seems more consistent in a number of ways than the Sprout. They're asking different things from you, so we'll see if the Beastie is regularly a 1 mana 3/3 or if it's frequently just a 1 mana milk 1 card per turn. Bushy Bodyguard didn't really pan out, so we're going to go ahead and swap this to one of my favorite OTJ cards in Raucous Entertainer. This card might be a little bit clunky making the transition for cube, but it also does some really powerful things in terms of stats, especially in our green-white deck. I'm sure there's no reason we made this swap. No, sir, just a random swap we settled on, right? Tail Swipe used to be somewhat interesting, but the kind of green removal we get now with cards like Hunter's Talent, it's just wild. This card has not aged well. That's going to take us into our multicolor and colorless section. We're making a conscious effort to not have an entire cube be just FTKs and recursion. Wickerfolk looks to be a premier aggressive creature that'll scale up into a respectable threat. Its Quinth is great, just to be clear, but we have so many of these effects floating around that we need to trim. Snacker's a great card, but in cube, it sort of suffers from the Arclight Phoenix problem of singletons not really maximizing the card. The real power of cards like the Snacker is being able to put multiples into play. Intimidation Campaign is a fan favorite and should be a reliable engine in most of your blue-black decks, and we think it's a pretty sweet build around. Arabella looks like one of the wildest ceiling uncommons that we've seen in quite a while. I don't think it's going to be unrealistic to be doming people for 3 with the trigger on turn 3, and then later in the game could just represent ending the game if you get to attack with it, given the wide kind of boards that we sometimes see in Peasant. Helix is a great card for sure, but it's way less exciting than Legally Distinct Annabelle Doll. The Battle Mage was a really cool card, and I think it was a worthwhile test, but it ended up not being trivial to get the colorless mana for this card, and it was frequently rotting in people's hands. Bookworm feels like an easy include. We don't have a lot of ways to put a creature into play face down, but just it's a really solid stat line looter, and that's going to be enough, we think. They appear to be on to this play stuff face down archetype as well, so it's possible this card gets even better down the road. All right, please put down your pitchforks, refund your torches. Spider Spawning is one of the cards in this cube that frequently just says, okay, the game is over now. You'll put 5 or 6 tokens into play on the first cast, and then it'll set you up to do even more on the second. It's an entire deck's game plan that we also find by our enablers. It's been here forever, and it's just impossible for a lot of decks to actually get past. It ends up being a prime contributor to the sort of go big arms race in the cube, and I think it's a big reason why the sort of normal mid-range decks haven't been doing so well. We've been seeing more in the way of either super fast combo-y Boros, or Rakdos ignore your board when it comes to winning with aggressive decks. And then there's been an arms race on the other side trying to just go as big as possible to beat cards like the Spawning. You grab something like a Golden Demise potentially to clear it out if you're heavy black, but the green-black player's already likely to be in that space. And there's just not a lot of ways to actually beat this much power and toughness when all of it also has reach. Brood Spinner is a fine replacement for it, we feel. It's a crazy high power level 2 drop that also functions in this sort of win the game capacity by giving you a bunch of flyers. It also plays well with the unreasonable amount of black recursion. We've gotten a lot of negative feedback on the Spawning lately, and it just gets better as Magic has really started to hit the Yu-Gi-Oh-esque your graveyard is a second hand phase of life. We went ahead and put in Rise of the Varmints as a supplement, but while Rise of the Varmints is much better at actually ending the game by attacking with a bunch of creatures, it also doesn't provide reach and loses to Fear Fire foes. So it has a little more counterplay than a card like Spawning does. Perilous Mirror is the double whammy of basically exclusive sideboard card and also super tedious to play against. It's a rock solid card for what it does, but what it does is also grinding games to a halt. Scrabbling Claws is a piece of graveyard hate that kind of hits where we want. It's not 100% free like the Scrap Gorger just being incidental, but it does pull together these sort of crime triggers, roots, self-exile effects, and delirium into a 1-mana package, which we feel like is a pretty good place to be. Another large-scale meta change, we're finally going to axe the rare lands and go fully peasant. We started this with the MH3 lands we gotten. We're going to go ahead and complete that now. Moving forward, we're kind of expecting more frequent and better lands at Peasant, which is really exciting after a decade of game lands. These 13 or less life lands represent some of the first lands that produce mana of multiple colors and don't interplay tapped. And then to ensure that the LTR land cyclers and other such cards that care about land types are able to still be played, we're going to go ahead and bring in the DMU domain lands. All right, so here is just a quick text change log if that's what you're interested. I'm going to leave this up for just a second and then close this video out. Thanks everyone for joining me today. Hit us up in the comments. What do you think? Is Spooter Spooning the best card ever in Peasant and we're just idiots? Is there a card in DSK that we missed? Tell us your thoughts and then come over to the Jankiver Gaming Discord and come play Peasant Cube or any of our other great offerings. We play Wednesday and Friday evenings as well as 2 drafts offered every weekend. We have this Peasant Cube and our mainline JDG Cube every week, and the rest of our slots are spotlighting various cubes made by our Discord members. If your cube becomes a fan favorite, you can even see it being drafted on a semi-regular basis. Catch me talking with Chris and Tim on the Jank Tank, which is posted on Libsyn and our YouTube channel, and find me streaming on twitch.tv/Teld Talks. And I also post VODs of MTG and now other games on my YouTube channel of the same name. So here's where I'd put a catchy outro phrase if I had one, but I don't, so I'm just going to end this video now. Goodbye.